because this is being. Sure. Oh, no, it's on now, all right. There's a little green light? Okay, good. All right, proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to give a very brief opening because I think you're going to hear the crux of the case through the witnesses. And the witnesses today are going to be Sheriff Schuster and Detective Lieutenant Jason Ellsbury. And he has a dual purpose and dual hats kind of to speak about today, but he is also the internal affairs investigator that handled the IAs on Michael Ramirez. So the case is relatively simple. We have Deputy Ramirez, who is an 18-plus year veteran with the Mohave County Sheriff's Office, who failed in his training and his responsibilities as a sergeant. He violated the same policies repeatedly. He was counseled on these same policies, but then violated these same policies again. And you're going to hear about the cases of the policy violations, the IAs. And just a brief introduction to those cases, both of them had different ages, but you had medically compromised individuals. One individual had emotional trauma needs. One of the elderly gentlemen had suffered from dementia. Policies were not followed. NCIC entries were not made. Silver alerts were not made. Search and rescue was not notified when these individuals went missing. And ultimately, they were not rescued. It was turned into a recovery. These failures to act and the failure to follow protocol left the sheriff with no other option than to demote. So you have Sheriff Schuster, who has to put his faith in the supervisors to also be a supervisor but mentor younger deputies. So if you can't follow policies and procedures, you're of no benefit to train these up and coming deputies and how to follow and be responsible deputies in the future. But you also have an obligation, and the sheriff has an obligation to the community, that he is putting his faith, and by putting his faith in supervisors, the community is putting faith into people who know right from wrong and the basic left to right. And in this case, that didn't happen. Deputy Ramirez failed in his standard police work to the point where these individuals were not rescued. They were recovered. The failures left the sheriff with no choice, and you're going to hear that he had no choice but to demote Michael Ramirez from sergeant to deputy. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from counsel for the appellant. And please state your name for the record.
Morning, thank you. My name is Thomas Griffin. I'm counsel for Mr. Ramirez. There are two particularly relevant portions of the agency's hearing brief that I want to point out. One is the standard here is just cause, and the fourth factor is that the discipline is not excessive and that it's reasonably related to the seriousness of the offense and the officer's service record. And the second is that in the agency's own words within that same hearing brief, they say overall, Mr. Ramirez's service record as a sergeant was satisfactory. He's going to testify today. He's not going to tell you he's a perfect employee. He's going to address the issues at hand. He's not going to say that he's without fault in those. But he'll also tell you about his service record with MCSO. I believe it's 20 years coming up in July. He was a deputy for, I believe, about 14 years. He was a 5-year sergeant with a satisfactory performance record. He's still a field training officer back as a deputy. His position is that the discipline is excessive based on all the factors, including his service record. The discipline proposed is not only a demotion, but it's also a 17% reduction in pay. And the issue is that based on the county pay scales, if he's demoted, he has to go down 17%. There's no in between. That won't only severely impact the rest of his career, but it will also negatively impact and severely the rest of his life through his retirement. He's in the public safety personnel retirement system. He's going to talk about that a little bit. It's a defined benefit pension plan. At 20 years, which he has in July, he has a normal retirement, 50%. The longer he works, the more he gets. At some point, he can do what's called DROP, Deferred Retirement Option Program, and then he can work for up to 60 months, 5 years. It increases his retirement over time. That's all based on what's known as a high three. His highest 3 consecutive years of earning at the end of his employment. With this reduction prior to this reduction in pay, he has a lot of options. He can continue to work, he can increase his retirement. With this reduction in pay, he'll never get back up to what his high 3 is now. It's just impossible to ever do it. So he has options without this, he has no options with it. And so, pardon me. He'll tell you, and I don't think there will be any dispute from the county, he's been overall an effective employee for almost 20 years now. He got promoted based on his performance. By the county's own admission, he was a satisfactory sergeant. To not only demote him now, but to also reduce his pay by 17% is excessive. It's not just cause under the Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights, which applies to Mr. Ramirez. And because of that, he's going to respectfully request that you reverse the decision to demote him. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go ahead and let the county go ahead and present their case. Thank you.
I would call President Jason.
Also, I'd like to mention that I believe the commission members were given the opportunity to listen to the IA interviews on tape. Did you all do that?
I have not listened to it. I've read the document.
Okay, how about,
I did not read, but I have gone thoroughly through. these.
okay, so you've all read you read the reports?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Please state your name for the record.
Jason Ellsbury.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give in these proceedings shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Thank you.
Can you please state your name for the record?
My name is Jason Ellsbury.
And where do you work?
I am the Detective Lieutenant for the Mohave County Sheriff's Office.
How long have you worked for the Mohave County Sheriff's Office?
21 years.
And prior to being the detective lieutenant, what was your prior assignment with the sheriff's office?
My prior assignments were a deputy, a detective, the civil sergeant, and the detective sergeant of the sheriff's office.
So how long have you been, when you were a sergeant, how long were you a sergeant before you promoted to lieutenant?
Right under 3 years.
As a lieutenant, do you supervise other employees?
Yes, I do.
And as a sergeant, did you supervise other employees?
Yes, I do.
Now, can you tell us what other training certifications do you hold as a member of the sheriff's office?
I hold many because of the nature of the job. I used to be our computer forensics examiner, a firearms instructor, also the commander of our SWAT team, so I have training and experience related to that sort of events that we have to deal with at the sheriff's office.
And you are also at this point an IA investigator with the sheriff's office?
Yes, I am.
Did you receive training to become an IA investigator?
Yes, I did.
And what training do you receive?
I went to a number of classes put on by organizations that focus on internal affairs investigations that's either done through the Public Agency Training Council or a law and legal agency that actually is ran by attorneys that deal with the HR element of internal affairs investigations.
And approximately how long have you been doing internal affairs investigations?
approximately 9 years.
Now, in your approximate 9 years, how many IA investigations have you conducted?
Around 40.
And being an IA investigator, are there cases where you substantiate the allegations?
Yes.
And being an IA investigator, are there cases where you have not substantiated the allegations?
Yes.
Now, do you have experience through your tenure as a deputy, a sergeant, and now lieutenant with any searching of missing persons?
Yes, I have.
And what experience and or training have you received?
On the SWAT side of my training, we learn how to track people through open fields and urban areas. And then through the experience, I've assisted our search and rescue division with over 36 searches. And as an investigator, I've investigated between 50 and 100 missing person investigations.
Now, also through your position as an IA investigator, do you have to have a knowledge of how the Sheriff's Office policies work?
Yes, you do.
And can you kind of explain to us, just so that we know, do sworn officers have to acknowledge any type of policies within the Sheriff's Office?
Yes, they do.
And how does this acknowledgement happen?
So we switched a number of years ago to a company called Lexipol, and it's all web-based, so everybody has access to all of our policies all the time. And anytime there's a policy change, each individual is required to acknowledge that they have read and understood that policy. And then on top of that, we have daily training bulletins. So every day there's a scenario base that covers a policy specific to one section of our policy. They have to read over it and answer a question correctly that's applicable to that policy.
Now, why are policies so important within any law enforcement agency, not just the Sheriff's Office?
Well, they safeguard the employee as well as the agency for wrongdoing on either half.
And are there policies, I'm speaking now with the Sheriff's Office, is there policies that deal with silver alerts?
Yes, there is.
And what is a silver alert?
A silver alert is something that's actually overseen by the Department of Public Safety as far as somebody that has advanced age, dementia, that could be at risk, either through environmental factors or their own medical history, or a situation where they are at risk for a bad scenario. And this is a nationwide thing where there's silver alerts where it's broadcast through social media, all the signs that are over the highways, through all the television channels, alerting the public about this individual with the information we have so we can try and find this individual with a positive resolution.
Are there policies within the Mohave County Sheriff's Office that relate to search and rescue?
Yes, there is.
And can you, I understand you're not a member of search and rescue, but what is the function of search and rescue within the Sheriff's Office?
The function of search and rescue is, and it's entirely volunteer-based. We have 2 sworn that kind of oversee it. But if there's an individual that is lost, hurt, injured, for some reason, they're not where they're supposed to be, it's part of the constitutional job of the sheriff's office to go try and find these individuals. And the search and rescue division, that's their entire job, is to try and locate these people for a positive resolution, and in the event that that doesn't happen, to recover them if need be as well from a negative event.
And is there policies that dictate that if there is a missing person, search and rescue shall be notified?
Yes.
And is there policies that go into more detail with regards to notification procedure with a missing person?
Yes, there is.
Okay. And is there policies that speak about domestic violence cases?
Yes, there is.
And is there Arizona state requirements that relate to domestic violence cases.
Yes, there is.
And we'll talk about those in just a brief minute here, but Lieutenant, if somebody doesn't acknowledge these policies, what problem does that create?
Well, if they don't acknowledge the policies, they're actually violating a policy by not acknowledging that they're viewing and understanding the policy.
Now, I want to refer you, and I believe that they put a notebook in front of you. Let me flip back to the table of contents so I can tell you exactly. It is tab 15. It's record of pages 1 through 20. Tell me when you're ready.
I am here, ma'am.
Okay. Can you tell me what those documents indicate, what they are?
So this is a printout from the Lexipol policy that I was explaining earlier that shows the actual policy name, and it shows the issue date of that policy and then the acknowledgement date that that individual, in this case it lists Ramirez, is when they acknowledged that policy.
And do you see in this acknowledgements, perhaps on several different occasions, regarding missing persons policy?
I do.
Okay. And do you see through these documents that Deputy Ramirez acknowledged conduct with regards to proper conduct within the sheriff's office?
Yes.
And do you see through this that there is acknowledgements of public alerts?
Yes, I do.
And just for clarification, what is a public alert?
So we have a number of public alerts. It can be something as simple as having our public information officer put a photograph of somebody on our social media page, and it could go towards amber alerts or silver alerts as well. And
do you see policy acknowledgement of standards of conduct, perhaps in several different locations?
Yes, I do.
And is there policy acknowledgements by Deputy Ramirez with regards to search and rescue?
Yes, I do see it.
Within your IAs, and I know we'll talk about this in a minute, did Deputy Ramirez previously acknowledge the policies he's alleged to have violated?
Yes, he did.
Now, how many internal investigations have you done on Deputy Ramirez?
I have done 2 where he is the principal.
Now, in general terms, I guess, what were those IAs both concerning?
Both of those IAs were concerning policy violations as far as supervisor responsibilities, standards of conduct, missing person investigations, and conduct towards the employee.
And when you did both of these IAs, what was your rank at that time of Michael Ramirez?
He was a sergeant during those internal affairs investigations.
Just so that we're all clear, can you explain the function or purpose of an IA?
So IAs are not used towards a complaint towards an individual employee, say, a deputy speeding down the road and then somebody calls in a complaint. That is not an IA. That does not warrant it. These investigations, if taken at face value of the allegations, if it requires an employee to be demoted, suspended, or terminated, or would be, I guess, a horrible look in the public eye, if that was proven to be absolutely true, that is when the IAs are conducted.
And are you told to initiate an IA?
Yes, I am.
And typically, who gives you that directive?
That directive has to come from either the sheriff or the chief deputy.
Now, just so that we are clear, we're going to go in sequential order, year order. Were you asked to begin an IA of an incident that occurred in 2021?
Yes, I was.
And when you begin your IA, are you given any basic understanding of what you're investigating, or how does that work for you as the IA investigator?
It depends on the situation, but in this case, I was given the incident report, a memo that was drafted by Lieutenant Padilla to the chief deputy, and then an overview of some of the issues that the administration has found in an investigation or the conduct of an employee.
And can you briefly describe, the issues you were provided initially?
The issue that I was provided was that Sergeant Ramirez and Deputy Ingrassi had responded to a missing person call out in Golden Valley in, I believe, May of 2021. They searched the property and left. The individual that was missing was a 60-year-old man that had just moved from Oklahoma, I believe 10 days prior. He had left, not in a vehicle, but on foot, carrying 2 bottles of water, and had some, believed to be some medical issues to involve epilepsy, and then some emotional issues revolving around the death of a longtime girlfriend. And his father was the one that contacted us. They searched the property. Search and rescue was not notified. The division commander was not notified. And then during this time frame, due to the environmental conditions, because May in the desert is usually high 90s, if not low 100 degrees, and this individual had not returned, had not left in a vehicle. They did not know where he was. And then the reporting party, initially the father of this missing person, was so unhappy with the response of the sheriff's office that he had hired a private investigator after finding out what did not occur.
Now, I want to kind of go back in time. Did you, after given these facts, then do you talk, in this case, to, he was a Sergeant Ramirez?
Yes, I did.
And do you ask him questions for explanation purposes?
Yes, I did.
And when you're given these facts as a deputy, and then you are a sergeant, and then you're a lieutenant, what type of priority is a missing person call?
It's a high priority call.
And the terrain, can you briefly describe the terrain in Golden Valley?
Golden Valley, for the most part, obviously it's a valley, but there are outcroppings of mountains, and then it is, for the most part, flat in the middle, and then as you go towards the edges, towards Kingman and Bullhead City, it's very mountainous and rocky, and it is barren for the most part.
Lieutenant, is it important for the public, in this case specifically the family, to be able to trust the response of law enforcement?
Absolutely.
And why is that so important?
Well, it's a partnership between the sheriff's office and the community, and it has to go both ways. We have to get the public's trust to get accurate information and to assist us, and they have to be able to trust that we're going to do the best job we can with the information that they provide us.
Now, when you were speaking with Deputy Ramirez regarding this incident, did you present him with the violation, the policies he violated?
I did.
And just so that we're clear.
Can I just ask a question real quick? Maybe just stepping back a little bit, what is the first notice that the department as a whole has of these missing person cases or DV cases?
Usually the first notice we get, ma'am, is when somebody from the public calls us for either to report somebody missing or there's, you know, a neighbor calls in for a fight, a domestic violence, or a victim or somebody involved, will call us.
And that would be dispatch?
Yes.
Okay. And the dispatch then asks a few questions and writes it down and then sends it on, correct?
That is correct.
All right. And is dispatch, is it function in the investigative process at all? Or what is the quality or the investigative use of whatever comes over dispatch?
Dispatch is just point us in the right direction of who we need to go talk to or where we need to go.
Okay.
We do not base any of our investigation on what the dispatch notes are, because obviously then you're taking information through a second-hand or a third-hand person. But if somebody calls us like, hey, this individual called for this incident, it's far better for us to just go talk to them ourselves and not rely on the word that came through that person through dispatch and then to us.
So it is not the duty of the dispatch person to determine the veracity or the completeness of the report of the person calling?
Absolutely not.
Thank you.
I think we're going back to the policies. I think my last question was, did you present Deputy Ramirez with the policies that he had violated?
I did.
Okay. And for clarity, was the individual from missing in Golden Valley, was he entered NCIC?
Yes, he was.
And what does that mean when you enter somebody NCIC?
So that is a nationwide database. So if any law enforcement officer in any jurisdiction in the United States runs an individual for their name and date of birth or a vehicle or even a stolen gun or a vehicle, that individual will get this information accurately and quickly. So if somebody's entered into NCIC as missing and endangered, that means any other law enforcement officer that comes across this person and actually runs them will be notified that that person is in fact missing and endangered.
And is entering somebody NCIC, and again, we're talking about a missing person scenario, is that a policy requirement?
Yes, it is.
And was the on-duty lieutenant notified with this missing person?
He was not.
Is that a policy requirement?
Yes, it is.
Was search and rescue notified with regards to this missing person?
They were not.
And is that a policy requirement?
Yes, it is.
And can you explain, are detectives required to be notified in a missing person case?
Detectives are required under certain circumstances, whether the age of the missing person is under, I believe, 9, but normally we're notified anybody under the age of 13 or if there's foul play suspected. But the first initial response is to search and rescue and the division commander.
And were detectives given any information regarding this missing person?
We were not.
In fact, did detectives have to go back out under your command to help with this search?
Yes, they were.
And why was that?
The reporting party was not happy with our patrol division, so we figured that if we sent our detective division out, maybe we could smooth over some of the hard feelings toward the sheriff's office and try and get better information from the reporting party.
And when you say not happy with the patrol division, Deputy Ramirez was the responsible officer for this search.
He was the responsible supervisor on this event, yes.
Thank you. Now, did Deputy Ramirez give any explanation as to why he didn't follow policy?
Not a very good one, if you would call it an explanation, other than I asked him why he did not contact search and rescue, and his response was they didn't have anywhere to start searching.
When you're looking for a missing person, do you have to have visible indicia to where to start your search?
I don't quite understand the question as far as visible
Let me clarify.
indicia.
When you're searching for a missing person, are you always given the information like there's a footprint?
Oh no, very rarely.
Is there a protocol with regards to searching
Yes, there is.
And can you kind of briefly explain what the protocol might be?
Anytime there's a missing person, the first place we look is the residence. Because there's been many times where somebody's been missing and they're actually found hiding in their residence, especially children. But in this case, this was an older individual. But everywhere starts where they were either last seen or their residence and go from there.
Was a foot search conducted in this case?
According to Sergeant Ramirez at the time, he and the deputy looked on the property, did not see any shoe impressions, and said they didn't have anywhere for search and rescue to start.
Now, within this same internal affairs investigation, was there a claim regarding a domestic violence case?
Yes, there was.
And can you please,
Can I just go back to the one on the search and rescue one, and the Golden Valley one? Having listened to the IA interview, was also, did I get this correct, that he was asked whether or not he filled out an search and rescue missing person report, and he responded that he hasn't seen that form filled out by anybody in years?
That is correct. So I can explain that. It's a search and rescue data sheet that has information as far as shoe size, whether or not they smoke, what they smoke, their fitness level, has a number of information that's very helpful for our search and rescue division. And that is a requirement by policy when conducting a missing person, that is filled out prior to search and rescue responding on scene, so they have that information readily available to them.
And is it your opinion that that form should have been filled out in that case? In the Golden
Yes, it
Valley?
should have.
Did you do any follow-up on his claim that he had not seen that filled out in years?
I addressed that issue with our search and rescue coordinator and the division commander afterwards.
And was there any validity to that claim?
According to our search and rescue commander, when he gets called out, that information is filled out, not to the level that they would like it to be. But after this event, obviously, the division commander on the patrol level was made aware, so that was more of a requirement after the fact that they're actually being held to.
And in this case, as sergeant, what was his duty in that regard any different than than those under him?
He does have different responsibilities as a supervisor.
And what would that be?
To make sure that everything that needs to get completed is completed appropriately.
So, okay.
and just, I guess for clarity on that one, was everything completed appropriately that needed to be completed by policy with regards to the Yucca missing individual?
The Golden Valley missing individual, ma'am?
Golden Valley.
No, it was not.
Okay. Now, we're going to talk about the domestic violence incident. What information were you given prior to speaking with Deputy Ramirez about a domestic violence issue?
I was given a copy of a report that was completed by the same deputy that was involved in the missing person, Deputy Ingrassi, that Sergeant Ramirez at the time had approved. And it was a sticky note, why no arrest, with a question mark. So I reviewed that report and then included that into the IA that I was already conducting for supervisor responsibilities.
When you reviewed the report prior to talking to Deputy Ramirez, what did you observe as you were reviewing? What facts did you observe?
There's a female that came to the sheriff's office to report a domestic violence assault. Said that her boyfriend or husband, somebody that she had lived with, had got in an argument, and then he had struck her in the face, and then she left with the kid. He threw her clothes out on the porch. During that investigation, a child that they share in common, I believe was 4 years old, was talked to, said, I saw him hit mom. And then they talked to another adult who observed the male strike the female. The deputy tried to make contact with the offender, could not. and then closed the case out because the victim did not desire prosecution.
So let's step back just for clarity. Deputy Ramirez was the supervising sergeant at that time on that case.
That is correct.
Okay. And as a supervisor, being the sergeant we're talking about, do you have an obligation to review cases of your squad, the deputies on your squad?
Yes, all of their incident reports are forwarded to the sergeant for review to be dispositioned correctly in our in-house record system.
And why is it important to have a supervisor review the work of a deputy?
Well, if a supervisor has 5 deputies on their squad, just as an average, there's zero chance that that supervisor will have the ability to go to every call for service and physically monitor every call that these deputies go to, but they're able to review the documents, the reports that they draft, to see the quality of the work that they're doing, the quality of their reports that are going towards either the county attorney's office for charging or any other instance, and see what their employees that they supervise are doing on the street.
Is this, could you classify this as a way to correct deputy inaccuracies?
Absolutely.
Is it a way to monitor minor issues that can be corrected at that time?
Yes.
And is it a way to prevent minor issues to create larger issues in the future?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I wanted to ask a couple more questions. In terms of this particular, and again, I read the IA recording. I mean, I read it, I listened to it. I read the report. What does, in this situation, a DV situation, under the facts that you understood this to happen, what was required by statute and by policy?
The requirement by statute and policy is to shall arrest the individual.
Okay, and that was not done in this case?
No, it was not.
Do you recall what he said about why it wasn't, it was okay with him that it wasn't done in this case?
Yes, I do. His response was that they just kind of started not making arrests even then when they're supposed to.
Okay, so and I think the quote I was, it's just not done anymore. Is that what his response?
Yes.
Okay.
Lieutenant, at what point did the Mohave County Sheriff's Office stop making arrests because it just wasn't done anymore for DV cases?
To my knowledge, it was not.
And how many, rough estimate, have you handled DV cases?
Yes, I have.
And have you handled DV cases as a patrol officer,
Yes, I have.
as a sergeant,
Yes, I have.
and also as a detective lieutenant?
I haven't necessarily handled them, but I've overseen investigations involving domestic violence, yes, unfortunately.
And what is the Arizona requirement for domestic violence cases in terms of arrest?
If there's probable cause to make an arrest on a domestic violence, the officer shall make the arrest.
Was there probable cause in the domestic violence case we're referring to today?
Yes, there was.
Why is it so important that arrests are made in domestic violence cases?
Unfortunately, in domestic violence, there's always that cycle of violence between the offender and the victim. And they don't want their loved one to go to jail. They may be the breadwinner, or they may be threatened, if I go to jail, I come back, it's going to get worse for you. And then basically they're browbeaten as far as what could happen. And then I know it's recently been in the news in Moab, Utah. They had that Gabby Patino that there was domestic violence. They had probable cause to make the arrest. The officers did not make the arrest, and now she's dead. And the offender that they did not arrest was the one that in fact committed the murder. That is the worst case scenario.
So not only is it a policy within the sheriff's office, it's a community society prevention for future harm to come.
Yes.
Now, did you
May I ask
speak-
a question, please? On the domestic violence, do any of these cases ever go over to the county attorney's office that they themselves press charges and review?
Yes, if we charge somebody, we arrest them, it does go to the county attorney's office, and it's up to the attorneys at that point to determine whether or not they're going to move forward with prosecution or not.
Does it ever happen where there's not an arrest and the county attorneys review it and then decide to proceed?
Yes, that does happen as well.
In your training and experience, if a victim tells you, I don't want prosecution, do you not follow through with your duties?
The duties are more important than what the victim wants to do at that point, and we explain that to them.
Is that a violation to not make the arrest in this case?
Yes, it is.
And that's a violation of sheriff's office policy?
Yes, as well as state law.
Now, did you speak with Michael Ramirez regarding the domestic violence incident?
I did.
And what did he tell you upon your interview with him?
He told us that it was more of a department culture thing, that if the victim doesn't want prosecution, that they don't.
Let's stop you right there. Is that a departmental culture issue we have in the sheriff's office right now?
To my knowledge, no.
And have you been made aware of any memo that has come out, a directive from administration saying you shall not arrest a domestic violence suspect if victim doesn't want prosecution?
No, there was no memo.
And have you been given a memo or any directive stating don't make an arrest even if there is a cooperating witness?
No.
Now, did that complete the IA with regards to the year 2021?
It did.
And after you speak with Deputy Ramirez, what is your function at that point?
My function after I complete my investigation is to find the disposition for the allegations of the policy violations and then forward that to the chief deputy and the sheriff for their review.
Do you make any recommendations with regards to discipline?
I do not.
And once you were completed with your interview, what was your determination with regards to this domestic violence and Golden Valley missing person?
The policies were in fact violated. It was sustained and then sent to my administration.
Now,
just one more thing, was anything done in terms to determine whether or not such a culture existed that of violation of rules?
I had a conversation with the division commander, who was Sergeant Ramirez's supervisor at the time, and he told me, absolutely not, that is not a culture issue, and I explained to him at the time that this is what's being said. It needs to be addressed if it is the case. You're welcome.
Now, were you again asked to initiate an additional internal affairs investigation in the year of 2022?
I was.
And why were you asked to do another IA?
There was another missing person investigation that Sergeant Ramirez was involved with that, according to my administration, they believe that policies may have been violated, and they wanted me to conduct the investigation towards that as well.
And give us like an approximate date range. How long are we talking between the incident of the individual in Golden Valley till now being told, Lieutenant, there's another issue? How long of a time span are we looking at?
I believe it was 14 or 15 months.
In this case, what was the situation of the missing individual, and we're talking about now in Yucca, Arizona?
The sheriff's office was called by a local pastor who wanted to initially report that there was an 84-year-old Guatemalan man that suffers from dementia. Normally they have like a food pantry where the individuals, low income or need some food, show up. He did not show up as expected and was concerned for his welfare.
So I want to just, points of clarification. When you say he didn't show up as expected, or the reporting party said that, when you're hearing this information, did that indicate this reporting party may have known his routine?
Yes.
And what month was this individual, this man, reported missing?
August of 2022.
What's the weather, August?
Well, August is obviously monsoon season for Arizona. In 2022, it was extremely wet. We had many instances of flash flooding that month.
And when you're talking about flash flooding, what's the issue of flash flooding in Yucca? Or is there an issue of flash flooding in Yucca?
Yeah, there's an issue of flash flooding anywhere in Mohave County with during monsoon season.
Now, did this, the RP, the individual that was missing, did he indicate he was able to, the missing man was able to drive a car?
He did not have a vehicle.
And had this RP stated that in fact he had picked him up on other occasions, observing him walking?
Yes, he had.
And medical, what information did the RP relay, or if there was any information about the medical needs of this elderly gentleman?
The possibility of dementia.
And was there any family members that lived in Yucca for this individual?
No, there was not.
Now, I want to talk to you a bit about the function of a reporting party. Through your training and experience, what information and what do you do with a reporting party when they call in and give information?
We take their information at face value, and if it's a criminal event, we move forward and try and gather our own evidence, and if they're just reporting just the information that the sheriff's office knows, we document that.
Can you determine credibility of a reporting party without talking to the reporting party?
Generally, no, you cannot.
Now, did you speak, well, let me step back one step. Did you gather documentation with regards to this investigation prior to talking to Deputy Ramirez?
I did.
And as part of that documentation that you gathered, did you collect GPS data with regards to Deputy Ramirez's vehicle?
I did.
And did you submit that within your IA packet reference this case?
I did.
Okay. And I want to have you take a look at the GPS documentation. So it would be the IA 22004 is tab 6. Tab 6, the GPS documentation. And it starts page probably starting page around 20. If you could take a look at that document and tell us when you're ready what we're looking at on this page, or what this shows us.
So this is a printout that I get from Verizon Fleet, which is a service we use for the GPS location of our county vehicles. And this is for the day in question and around that time frame of the vehicle that Sergeant Ramirez was assigned at this time.
And why is it important to review the GPS data with regards to this case? What was your purpose?
Well, my purpose initially was to find out how long Sergeant Ramirez was actually at the scene or in the area to see if there was any substantial findings as far as he was out there for 2-3 hours trying to look for this individual, or if it was a short time frame.
And when you're getting this information about this individual, what type of a call is this missing person in Yucca? What level call would you classify that as?
Well, I believe initially this was titled a welfare check or an information call, but when you actually read the call notes and find out there's a dementia individual that's outside of their pattern or somebody's looking for them, it is now a high priority call for service, especially considering the environmental factors that were going on at this time frame.
And would those call notes that you just indicated be available to Sergeant Ramirez to review at the time that he was assigned to this?
Yes.
Now, what address was this missing person, did he live at in Yucca?
The address was on Shep Lane in Yucca.
So within these documentations, is it the best, or how do you do your time calculations? Do you just go based off of an address listed, or how did you determine time spent on the residence?
So the way that our GPS works is generally you get a new reading around every 3 minutes or so. It's not 100% every second of the day it's tracked. So I just looked in the general location of where that was, and then if the vehicle is stopped for a length of time, we know, and then if the vehicle is traveling down the road, we're also provided with their speed at that time as well.
And how do you know if a vehicle is stopped?
It's very difficult to see from a black and white printout, but there's actually a red dot that shows that they're stopped, and also when you look at the list, it says max, average, and current. That's also their miles per hour speed as well. So if it's 0, that shows me that they're stopped or parked, and then if there's a number, it usually is a good indicator that they're traveling down the roadway.
So through your investigation, did you determine the length of time from being assigned this call to calling or checking off of this call?
Yes, I did.
And how long of a time did you view this to be via the GPS data?
Just based on this GPS data, it was a maximum time of 16 minutes in the area of Shep Lane, and then around 6 minutes parked near that residence.
So, training experience, you're an IA investigator. What are you thinking when you see a 6-minute time frame parked, or at least showing a 0 speed at the residence?
It's very hard to conduct any investigation in 6 minutes.
And for clarity, the 16-minute is not 16 minutes at 0 speed.
That is correct. It's just in the area of where the reporting party lived and was reported to be missing from.
I've reviewed all through this, trying to figure out your time frame and everything else. And the only thing that I could find on Yucca was on page 27.
I'm looking
And I'm a little confused when it says unassigned. And I could not find anything on the ship address. Can you maybe explain where you're seeing that data to get the 16 minutes, please?
Absolutely. If you refer to page 26, and I'm looking at the line, and it's date and time stamped on 8/5 of 22, and it shows 10:41, 30 seconds. And for the address, it shows 16342 South Shep. That is the first data point collected on Shep Lane in Yucca. And then if you go up to, I believe it's the 4th line down from the top, it shows 8/5/22 at 10:57 and 36 seconds. And that shows the 16220 South Shep Lane with the average of 7, that shows him leaving that area. And that's what I used to gather that information.
I think what's confusing is because it says Bullhead,
Yeah.
but it's actually Yucca, correct?
Yes, I was just going off of the actual address. I don't believe that Verizon's overly accurate sometimes with the actual town, because Yucca is, I don't know if it's not viewed as an incorporated area, Mohave County, so sometimes you'll get the strange city associated with it.
And for clarity, the address that you just indicated, the 16, 3, gosh, now I lost it, but the address was on, for the Yucca individual, his street was Shep Lane.
That's correct.
Okay. So now you have all this information. At what point do you decide, okay, now, or do you decide, now I have enough, I need to talk to Deputy Ramirez?
Yes, once I review the information I have, that's when I serve him his paperwork and set up a time for an interview.
And did you speak with him with regards to this issue?
I did.
And what information did he relay to you in this interview?
That the reporting party had talked to Deputy Cardenas, which is one of his deputies that he supervises. Sergeant Ramirez was already out in that area due to a motorist assist, obviously due to the flash flooding and the weather that we're receiving. He went by the house. He believed that the gate was locked, and then he left, and they closed out that call for service.
Okay, let's unpack that. You say he went to the residence and told you the gate was locked.
That is correct.
Was the gate locked?
It was not.
And how do we know the gate wasn't locked?
Because the reporting party called in the following day and was able to gain access to that property, and it was dummy locked.
And Lieutenant Ellsbury, when you're looking for a missing person, do you stop looking for that missing person just because the gate appears to be shut?
No.
What do you do?
Well, at that point, you try and find another way to access the property. Even if the gate's locked, it doesn't mean you can't climb the gate.
Would it be conceivable to hop a fence?
Yes, it would.
And why is it important to get onto that property?
Like I said before, missing people, if he didn't show up to the pantry, well, maybe he's at his house, maybe he fell down, maybe he had an injury. That's always the first place you start, is the last place that they're suspected to be, and that was the residence.
And if you're investigating a missing person and you start at the residence, sometimes is there tracks that you can follow leading away from the residence?
Yes,
So searching the residence and the property is pretty important.
it's extremely important.
And was that done in this case?
It was not.
And as a supervisor, are you charged with knowing that you should be searching the residence?
Yes,
And is it a policy violation to have not conducted a search as a sergeant, patrol sergeant, initial search, I should say?
yes, it is.
Now let's just talk a bit about the policies that you confronted Deputy Ramirez with during your interview. Let's start with NCIC. Was an NCIC entry made in this case?
It was not.
And why was it not made? Did he give you an explanation?
When asked, the explanation provided was that he did not believe that the reporting party was credible.
Why did he not believe the reporting party was credible?
He told me that the reporting party did not know the date of birth of the individual that he was calling on.
How many cases have you conducted throughout your career as a law enforcement officer?
Tens of thousands.
How many cases are you provided a date of birth with prior to beginning your investigation?
Very few.
Is that a prerequisite to do any type of investigation to have a date of birth?
No, it's not.
Was search and rescue contacted with regards to this missing individual?
They were not.
Is that a policy violation?
Yes, it is.
Was the on-duty lieutenant notified with regards to this missing person?
It was not.
And is that a policy violation?
It is.
And as the lieutenant and detectives, were detectives ever notified of this missing person?
We were not.
So essentially, after a 6-minute zero speed, not entering the property, not conducting an investigation, and assuming the RP is not credible because he didn't know a date of birth, what investigation was completed?
I believe you just described what investigation was completed. It was not.
And is this a problem?
Yes, it is.
And was this elderly man ever found?
Yes, he was.
And in what state?
He was found 8 days later deceased due to natural conditions as far as the environment.
And when you say natural conditions, environment, are you talking about temperature?
exposure to the elements or a possible medical event, it's hard to say at that point.
And was he found within the vicinity of Yucca?
Just under 3 miles away from his residence.
When you are reviewing a file for documentation purposes, did you take a look at any documentation, whatever date it happened to be, with regards to the call volume of Deputy Ramirez?
Yes, I did.
And when I say call volume, I want to say responding assigned calls to him on that date.
Yes.
And I'm going to refer you to tab 7, and it's only one page under tab 7. And when you get there, can you tell us what this form is that we're looking at?
This is a printout. Is everybody there so I can describe it? So this is a printout of the calls for service on the time of shift for Sergeant Ramirez that he responded to the afternoon of August 5th into the early morning hours of August 8th.
What type of calls did he respond to?
The missing person in Yucca, a motorist assist in Yucca, which he was actually out in the area for initially, a civil problem in the Butler-Kingman area, and a 911 hang-up in the Butler-Kingman area as well.
And as a detective lieutenant, if there was a major issue happening within Mohave County, meaning if there was like an armed robbery, a homicide, would you have been notified?
Yes, I would.
And was there anything of that nature, a priority incident occurring on August 5th?
I was not notified of any critical incident at that time frame.
Is there anything that you would see on this list through your training experience that would alert you to say, maybe that does explain why he only spent 6 minutes at a 0 speed?
No.
What does this sheet tell you through your training experience?
Shows me he was out in Yucca for a short period of time and then was out in Kingman for a short period of time.
Is that a problem?
In this case, yes.
Why?
Because the missing person in Yucca was not properly investigated.
Just going back to the Golden Valley incident in 21, I know, if you testified to this, I missed it, but it seems to me I read that the relative involved hired their own private PI, and that the body was found, and it was located less than a mile.
So in that incident, there were some remains that matched the description of our missing individual, but we have yet to positively confirm the identity. We're still waiting on a DNA comparison to say 100% that that was, in fact, the body of the missing person in Golden Valley.
And do I recall correctly that that was less than a mile from?
That is correct. It was, I believe, like 0.97 miles away from the residence.
To this day, has the family ever found, referencing the Golden Valley, have they ever found their missing family member?
No.
And by that, maybe I should clarify, have they ever called the sheriff's office and say, he walked back home, we found him?
No, they have not.
So jumping back to the Yucca, when you confronted Deputy Ramirez about the policy violations, what was your discussion, your further discussion with him? What did he tell you?
He continued to say he just didn't believe that the reporting party was not credible. And then he did admit that he violated policies.
And specifically, what policies did he admit that he violated to you?
The missing person policy, the standards of conduct for actually policy violations, the silver alert policy, notifications for public alerts, supervisor responsibilities, and standards of conduct.
Jump back, sorry, I'm gonna hopscotch here a bit for you. Back to the 21 investigation, did Deputy Ramirez, former Sergeant Ramirez, admit to violating policy in that case?
Yes, he did.
And what policies did he violate in the 21 case?
The same policies I just noted on the 22 case.
So now we have approximately 14 months later, the same policies being violated.
Yes.
Now, did you investigate anything else with regards to the internal affairs incident of 22 in Yucca?
I did not.
Did you make a final determination as to violation or not violation of policies?
I did. I found that all the policy violations were sustained.
And by sustained, you mean what?
It means that their policies were in place and the employee did not do what they're required to do by our policy. So the allegations are in fact sustained that he did not do what he was supposed to do.
Lieutenant, and perhaps this includes the 21 IA as well as the 22 IA. What was a simple fix for these problems?
Contact search and rescue by phone and contact his division commander.
And could you contact your division commander, by phone?
Yes.
So essentially this boils down to picking up the phone.
Yes, it does.
At that point, were your duties as the IA investigator completed?
Yes.
I don't have any further questions.
So the record reflect that the counsel for the respondent has, for the appellant has no questions. And I guess I don't need it. Any board members?
I just have one question for clarity regarding these policies. At no time is there any allowance of discretion for the initial officer to use to say or dismiss the situation altogether, correct?
No, and the policy, you err on the side of caution, and that is common sense. And this is something that every individual officer is told from when they start to the academy to when they're in field training at the sheriff's office is if you don't know something, call somebody that does.
Okay, thank you.
So if he had any question about whether he should have responded based on the reporting party's suspected credibility or inaccuracy, should he have called his lieutenant at that point?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would call as my next and final witness the Sheriff Schuster.
Is your mic on the table there?
I'm sorry?
Is your mic on the table?
It is.
Okay.
Please state your name for the record.
Douglas Schuster.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give in these proceedings shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Thank you.
Can you please state your name for the record?
Doug Schuster.
And what is your job title?
I am the elected sheriff of Mohave County.
How long have you been the elected sheriff of Mohave County?
Feels like 100 years. I've been the elected sheriff. I'm in my second term, so a little over 6 years.
And prior to being elected sheriff, did you work for the Mohave County Sheriff's Office?
I did.
And what was your job title at that time?
I retired actually after 26 years of previous service at the rank of sergeant. I started my career in 1989 working in the adult detention facility, went to the patrol division in 1991, promoted to sergeant in 1995, actually early 96, and remained in that position until my retirement date in 2015.
Now, In your tenure, have you supervised direct subordinates as, in your sergeant duties?
For many years.
Now, have you taken training, have any experience with regards to searches that you have experienced as in your tenure?
I have.
And I guess maybe we should clarify that. Have you done searches, have training experience with regards to waterway incidents?
I do.
And when I say waterway incidents, we're talking about boating,
Correct.
missing boaters. Have you had training, you have experience with regards to land searches?
I do.
And do you have any classification with regards to searches or any titles?
I'm actually a certified search coordinator for the state of Arizona.
And when you say certified search coordinator, what does that mean?
Well, basically it means I have been given the training to run a search operation. It's something that I haven't done in many years. We have an active search and rescue program now that is comprised of 2 search coordinators. So with that training, along with additional training throughout my years of service, I have actually quite a bit of knowledge and experience in that area.
Now, Sheriff, can you explain to us the expectations of a sergeant within the Mohave County Sheriff's Office?
Absolutely. So a sergeant has the role of a deputy sheriff with the added responsibility of supervision. They are responsible for ensuring that their subordinates do what they need to do, that they stay within policy, that they stay within department operational orders, and they stay within state law. They are the direct line supervisor to manage the deputy sheriffs on the street. And when I say that they have to ensure that their staff stays within policy, of course, the sergeant himself or herself has that same obligation placed upon themselves.
And as the sheriff, do you have values that you also expect to see in your sergeants?
I do.
And what values do you expect to see?
I expect all my staff to be professional and courteous at all times. I expect them to have the knowledge necessary to perform the duties. I expect them to lead by example, and I expect them to do an honest day's work.
Let's go back to searches. How many searches have you experienced in your tenure?
Numerous.
And when you say numerous, does that include the land and water?
Yes.
Did you, as the sheriff, make the determination of demotion?
I did.
And when you make the determination of demotion, are you provided documentation in the form of findings, reports, to help you make that determination?
I am.
And what documents were you provided with the determination to demote in this case?
In this particular case, I was provided with the internal investigation that encompassed the entire incident that brought us here today.
Now, in your time as a sheriff of Mohave County, how many sworn officers have you demoted?
This would be my first.
And as a sheriff of Mohave County, have you hired sworn officers?
I have.
And have you fired sworn officers?
I have.
And why was your decision to demote? Why did you make that decision?
Well, the decision was made based on then Sergeant Ramirez's inability to perform the function required to him as a sergeant. And that goes back to the prior incident that I'm sure we'll discuss coming up. But he was outside of policy. His actions were detrimental to the sheriff's office, and the decision was made at that point.
And you're correct. We're going to jump back here and talk about that. But I want to start with what is kind of classified as prior discipline.
Okay.
As a sheriff, when you're making these determinations, were you provided any letter of reprimand information from the file?
Yes.
And can you tell us what this letter of reprimand that you were provided was regarding with Sergeant Ramirez?
I believe in that instant, I reviewed his entire file, and I know there were a couple of letters of reprimand. I believe the one you're referring to is in regards to a domestic violence case that he cleared that was clearly inappropriate and not investigated properly.
So when you say he did not investigate it properly and he cleared a case inappropriately, why is this a problem as a sergeant?
The sergeant has an obligation to the public and to the agency to ensure that his subordinates are doing the job properly. In a situation like domestic violence, these are critical incidents. These things go from 0 to 100 very quickly, and that's why the law is very specific as to how they're handled when there's an assault that takes place. The sergeant's duty is to ensure that his staff is handling these calls correctly, and in this case, that was not done.
Can I interrupt just real quick? As opposed to the 22 incident, as opposed to the 21 incident, I'm assuming you got a report on the 21 incident. What action did you take at that point?
On the 21 incident, my initial intent was to demote at that time. When I brought then Sergeant Ramirez in, I allowed him an opportunity to explain himself. He brought up some issues that I looked into, and I elected to give him the benefit of the doubt and went with an alternative discipline at that time.
And something about operational, he was on some kind of corrective period, is that correct?
Correct. As a result of that 21 issue, that 21 case, he was put on a special observation period. I believe it was a 6-month observation period, basically saying, hey, your behavior is unacceptable. We are going to be monitoring you. We want you to succeed, so change your behavior. And had he done so, again, we wouldn't be here today.
And during that special observation period, what courses did the sheriff's office do to help him to succeed?
I didn't catch the last part of your question. I'm sorry.
Was there any steps provided to Officer Ramirez regarding additional training or anything to help him succeed, or coaching, or?
Great question. Yes, the observation period at that level as a sergeant is directly falls directly under the supervision of the district commander at that time, which is a lieutenant, and they monitor weekly. So there is dialogue. What can we do to help you? It's very hard when you're talking about an 18-year veteran deputy. They have the knowledge. They've received the training. Either they're going to do the job properly, or we have to figure out what correction is needed. And in this case, we were hoping that correction was made.
Would that also include going over the statutes and local policy that pertain to that behavior, and would make that behavior, to correct that behavior? In other words, that he was expected to go by policy and the state statute?
Great question. Absolutely. And again, even throughout the internal investigations that you're privy to, he acknowledged he knew the policy and he simply didn't follow us. He knew that he was outside of policy. So that's where the corrective action comes in. And again, it's always been my nature to err on the side of caution. I'm talking about someone's livelihood and their life. I certainly am not out to demote somebody willy-nilly, but in this situation, it was well warranted and I stand behind it.
And what alternatives did you have for discipline in 22?
In 2022?
Yes.
At that point, at minimum, was going to demote him. The alternative would have been termination, which I did consider.
Okay.
Sorry, I want to jump back here just for some clarification. After the internal affairs was completed for the 21 incident, and I'm referencing the Golden Valley incident and the domestic violence case, was that packet provided to you as the sheriff?
It was.
And at that point, do you review documentation to include the employee file?
Correct.
I want to talk to you briefly about evaluations. In the evaluations, since Deputy Ramirez was a sergeant, job knowledge and ability to perform through as a supervisor. What marks did he receive on these evaluations?
For many years, he received a 2, which is below standard.
And how does somebody receive a 2 that's a below standard, but yet come out with satisfactory evaluation markings?
I'm glad you raised that question. This is an ongoing problem. It's a human resource issue. And as a whole, by design, the evaluation process works well in the county. When you're dealing with law enforcement, we have to make some changes, which we have done, and I can explain those if you would like. But the bottom line is this: we have many categories that we rate each month. And maybe one of those categories is appearance, okay? And then another category might be job knowledge. Well, clearly job knowledge is much more important and vital than appearance. So if the person shows up and his boots are shined and he looks wonderful, he gets a 5 for his appearance, right? But then he gets a 1 for job knowledge. He has no clue what's going on. When we average that out, we come up with a 3, which by county standards would be a standard evaluation.
And is there a category in these evaluations for decision making as well as job knowledge?
There is.
And in the evaluations that you reviewed, and I'm talking as Deputy Ramirez was a sergeant, did he receive a below standard for decision making for many years?
He did.
And is that something that you take into account as a sheriff?
Again?
Is that something you take into account as a sheriff?
Yes.
Now,
Can I just ask one question? Are these evaluations also tied to pay increases?
That's a fabulous question. For many years, they were not, and I think that's why, and I know speaking from my prior time with the sheriff's office, they were not as valued as they are now. They did nothing, there's no benefit to doing these, although they were still required and done. Having taken office in 2017, we're fighting hard for our troops, and we want to see them excel, and we rely very heavily on these evaluations because it does help us not only evaluate the employee, but be able to seek more compensation for the job they do. So short answer, yes, ma'am.
and you mentioned that changes have been made to evaluations.
Yes.
And can you explain that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Although we haven't changed the form, I recognize the deficiency actually because of this most recent incident, or the first incident, 21, I should say, where we had 2s listed for high priority categories with no explanation. Okay, the number is just a number on a piece of paper. But if I'm looking at a form and it says he was below standard because he did A, B, and C, that's the justification I would need to see. So internally, we have an operational policy. If an employee is rated at above standard or below standard, there needs to be documentation to explain why. So that's a change we've made to adapt to the form.
Can you address, and I know I'm probably getting ahead of you, but the complained of 17% dock and pay at this point, would you explain that?
Absolutely. So with the demotion, the pay decrease is out of my hands. As a sheriff, I don't make that decision. That's a human resource decision. And I stand behind the decrease for this reason. We do not want to have deputy sheriffs making a higher wage than the people supervising them. That is how we conduct business at the sheriff's office. If you're a good employee and you promote, you should make more than the people you're supervising. So had we not gone, had the county, I should say, not gone with that increase amount, he would still be making a higher amount than the people potentially that are supervising him, and that is simply not right.
So if we look at tab 18,
Yes, ma'am.
range 19, as sergeant, he was at the 4063, which was the max, correct?
Correct.
And then he moved down to range 15 at the 3778, which is also the max.
That's on the form, correct. I can't verify those numbers without seeing, but that sounds right.
Okay, so there's, between range 19 and range 15, there's no other place to have put the salary at for, there was no other range in there involved, is that correct?
That's correct. We don't make special exemptions. If you're a deputy, you're range 15. If you promote, you move up in range.
Okay.
Otherwise, we'd really have problems with the system.
And actually, perhaps just for some further clarification, Sheriff, did you look into the possibility of a pay, classified out of step, out of range pay increase?
Can you rephrase that a little?
Sure. Did you inquire through the Board of Supervisors, I'm speaking, about the possibility of any other pay than topping him out as a deputy?
Okay, I did take this before the board. It was not at my behoovement. It was actually in response to a letter I received from counsel, from Mr. Ramirez's counsel, wherein he advised me Mr. Ramirez would agree to the demotion if I could get him more money. Now, I stood behind my recommendation, but as a courtesy, I did go before the board in executive session. I explained what the ask was, and they said they were not inclined to raise it above where he was at. In fact, they kind of grilled me as to why I didn't terminate him at that point, so it was an uncomfortable meeting.
Now, and for clarity, I guess we're throwing out number values. When he was demoted, did you put him as a top out deputy?
Yes.
And what does it mean by top out deputy?
It means unless there is a cost of living raise or an across the board increase, he would not be eligible for any additional step increases as he'd reached the maximum.
So he is paid the highest that he can be paid as a deputy sheriff?
Correct.
And that's initially where you put him?
Correct.
And I'm sorry, I'm gonna kind of jump back to clarify a couple issues. So you received the IA packet, you reviewed the evaluations, you sent Deputy Ramirez at that time after the 21 incident an intent to demote. Did you meet with Deputy Ramirez?
Yes, I did.
And can you tell us a little bit about that meeting?
Sure, we discussed the internal investigation. I explained to him that I was extremely disappointed in his decision-making. He did, at that point, bring out the fact that he did not feel he was a substandard employee, thought he was doing his job well, and that he didn't believe he met the need or the rating of a below standard in those two primary areas. I actually took a break during that. I said, all right, I'm going to have you take a minute because I wanted to review the documentation because I believe in ensuring that we do the best thing we can by our staff and for the public. So I did go through his yearly evaluations again. And of course, I noted that he was below standard. However, I began to look for that documentation we talked about earlier. Why was he a 2? There really was not sufficient backup to support it. And while I believe the lieutenant, who was his direct supervisor, would stand behind those ranks, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Quite simply, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. And so in my opinion at that time, I reduced the demotion to the special observation period, and that concluded that investigation with the understanding I just hope this would never happen again. We have to learn from our mistakes. That was the mindset.
But yet, did this come back to happen again?
It did.
And how were you notified of a second missing person incident, and now this is in Yucca?
I don't remember if it was the chief deputy or the undersheriff. I got a phone call. They told me that we had an incident very similar to the incident in 2021. And at one point, I really want to stress to this commission, failure to act is one thing. When we're dealing with human life, and we have a situation where a deputy or a sergeant neglects their duties and is outside of policy, leading to our search and rescue being delayed by days, days it took us to get people out in the field looking for them. That's a big, big problem. So when I heard about it, my immediately thought was, please tell me search and rescue was notified. No, they weren't, and the same held true that it was only days later that we actually got active in the search. Unacceptable.
As the sheriff, did you in fact go out to assist in the search when you were notified of this problem?
I did.
What did you observe and what part did you take in this search?
I first went and I spoke with Pastor Wayne. I actually met him at the address. He was very concerned. He explained what I'd already learned at this point, which was in greater detail than we had knowledge of when then Sergeant Ramirez briefly spoke to him, or I didn't even speak to him, I shouldn't say that. When I got there, there was a fence surrounding the entire property. There was a lock that appeared to be locking that fence, but it was a dummy lock. It was only through one clasp. So when I got out of the car and I saw this, I simply opened the gate and I went in the property, and I inspected every inch of that property, and I went in that house and I checked all over that house. And by this point, we are, I think, 4 or 5 days after the fact. There had been rain. Any potential evidence that would have put us in a good direction the day we were notified was gone. So at that point, I joined in the search. I began driving around for hours in the desert surrounding the house. It's been my experience, and as you've heard, there usually when situations like this happen, and it is a righteous search and rescue, they are found, unfortunately, within a mile to 3 miles of their residence, and that held true in both these cases.
You said that you spoke to the Wayne, who was the pastor.
Yes, ma'am.
Was he the reporting party initially in this case?
He was.
And did you find him to be a credible reporting party?
Absolutely.
Did you get any cause of concern with regards to the information he was giving you?
No. And speaking frankly, I don't even know where that comes from. I don't understand that. If you call to say your family member's missing or your friend, who are we to determine if that's a credible report? It's not our place, and it's inappropriate. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And again, I want to ask the question that that's not the job of the dispatch to determine whether or not this is a credible report, correct?
That's correct. That is solely the dispatcher's job, is to gather information to get us to where we need to go. In all cases, unless the reporting party says, hey, I don't need you coming out, I had something taken out of my yard, you can call me, we respond and talk to the reporting party. That's called the part of the investigation, and it's critical because you garner more information. One question makes you think of another, and it's the resource that we need to move forward in whatever the investigation is.
Sure. How do you conduct an investigation if you don't talk to the reporting party of the investigation?
You simply don't.
Now, were you provided an additional, the IA packet regarding the 22 incident in Yucca?
Yes.
And at that point, what is your next step as the sheriff of Mohave County?
Well, of course, I'm going to review it. I'm going to have discussion with my command staff, and I very quickly came to the decision to demote then Sergeant Ramirez.
And let's just step back also and talking about your duty as the sheriff of Mohave County. How important is it that the public have faith in law enforcement agencies?
It's vital, especially in the world that's ever changing right before our eyes. And here's the reason why. If the public loses trust in those who serve and protect them, they get to the point where they will either say, I'm not going to call and report this, I'll handle it on my own. Crime goes up, and it gets out of control very quickly. We are honored to have the trust of the public, and we deserve to return that service that is not only requested but deserved, and we failed to do that.
Were you made aware, jumping back to the Golden Valley incident, of any issues with regards to statements being made with the family with regards to your agency's handling of the Golden Valley missing person?
Yes, I recall, I don't remember who told me, it might have been my chief, that the sister had actually come into the community from out of state because she was concerned about her brother's well-being. She was very unhappy with our response or lack thereof, and she actually hired a private detective. It was either her or the father or both. The family hired a private detective to do basically our job in our absence. So yeah, I was dismayed. I was very discouraged when I heard that.
And when you hear this information as the sheriff regarding one of your sergeants, who you have faith, trust to lead by example, what are you thinking at that point?
Well, I'm thinking a lot of things. Some I can say, some I won't say. I will tell you that I'm thinking we have a significant issue if I can't get my staff, regardless of rank, to stay within policy and be mindful of our mission statement, which is to treat everyone with respect and dignity and to do their darn jobs. We got a problem. So that's what I was thinking.
You previously stated you have conducted many searches.
Correct.
Land and water.
Correct.
You were a sergeant when you conducted searches.
Yes.
What priority do you give in your day, in your shift, these missing person calls?
They're the highest priority. When you're dealing with the potential for injury or loss of life, unless there is an immediate in-progress event that would pull resources, you go until you can go no more. And there are many searches where you get to a point where we call it out of the, they're out of the box, so to speak. You can only go so far. So once you've exhausted all your options, only then would you consider terminating a search. And even after terminating a search, you're still going to have units in the area at least doing cursory patrols until you decide that's no longer effective. So there are many steps that come into play with a search.
Now, in your experience as a sergeant doing searches, were there times where you had to extend your shift to continue a search?
Too many to count.
In your time as doing searches, in your experience, when you see on paper that the 22 incident, 6 minutes were spent at a 0 speed, what does that alert you to?
It's just pure laziness and incompetence.
Are those problems in a supervisor?
A problem in all my employees, yes.
Now, I want to go back to the second IA. Now we're at the point where you are issuing a second intent to demote. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I guess just for clarity, just so that we understand, and for all parties, was there ever any other consideration of any other discipline that you could extend at that time?
Yes, again, I did consider termination.
And why did you decide to demote and not terminate?
I believe it's my nature to give the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes it comes back to bite me. I will say that I've always tried to see the best in my staff, and I enjoy the opportunity to try to correct behavior. We want to see people succeed. So at that point, I made the decision that clearly this man had no business being a supervisor, but maybe if he went back to deputy with under direct supervision, we could get him back to where I believe he should be.
Sheriff, when you're looking at all this paperwork, did Deputy Ramirez violate the same policies with regards to the second missing person that he did in Yucca that he did within the Golden Valley missing person?
Shockingly, yes.
And when you talk to him, and I'm referencing your first intent to demote where you did lessen it to a special ops period, did you explain to him why you had given him a first intent to demote?
I did.
And the policies that were violated?
I did.
And the importance of not violating these policies?
Yes.
Sheriff, when you hear, I have 2 more questions for you. And we were talking about pay just a bit brief earlier. When you hear somebody say to you, hey, Sheriff, I'll agree to my demotion, but I want to be paid higher. What does that tell you as Sheriff of Mohave County?
Well, it tells me that the person is concerned about the dollar and not the job. Now, I do understand we all have commitments, life commitments. I never want to take wages away, okay? It's not my intent to use it as a punishment, but when we discipline, which is a must in this profession, there are consequences that come with it. So I'll answer it by saying this. When I was a sergeant, if I was in the same situation, I would be very concerned about losing my position and not thinking about the money as a result. That's just my personal opinion.
Sheriff, do you have any regrets in this case?
Do I have any regrets? You know, I do. I honestly do. I regret that I did not demote him in 2021, and the reason for that regret, and it's something that I've tried to process, it's something that I will learn from, is had I made that demotion, which was justified and warranted, it's quite possible the incident in Yucca would have played out completely differently because he would not have been directly involved. And that's not to say we'd have had a better ending, but I believe that our search and rescue would have been involved from the onset, which would have raised the likelihood of success in that case. So that troubles me. It really does. And so if I do have a regret, that's what it would be.
And just for clarity, when you mean end result, you mean the fact that the individual in Yucca was found deceased?
Correct.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Good.
Sheriff, I have a couple questions for you, please. Can you speak to in general terms, the promotional process that occurs when a deputy tests for the sergeant position?
Sure. Our promotional process starts with an eligibility. They have to have at least 3 years of experience before they'd be eligible to request that potential promotion. They then make a statement, usually in memo form, saying, I'd like to test. Test dates are assigned. The first step that they go through is I believe, it's an oral board. The process may go back and forth, doesn't matter, but they do go before a panel. There is a written test. I think there is an additional assignment test, meaning here's a scenario. How would you resolve this in a certain amount of time frame? And then a list is established based on their scores.
Is there an interview with you as the deputy or as the sheriff at that time before they're promoted or during that process? Do you ask them any questions directly?
I do, every time.
Okay, any general idea of the questions you ask them? Are they different for everybody, the same, or what are you trying to gain from that?
It probably would be different based on the individual's experience. If I'm talking to a deputy who had been 12 years on the job and I've known and actually worked with, it would probably be more of expectations, make sure he understands our core values along that line. If they were a newer sergeant, we'll get more into specifics. The individual working for you are now your responsibility. You cannot delegate responsibility, and we ensure that they are well versed in what's expected of them.
Okay, and in this case, do you remember any of the answers that were given to you during your questions of Sergeant Ramirez?
Unfortunately, Sergeant Ramirez was promoted, I think, the year or two before I came into office, so I didn't have that discussion with him.
Okay. The letter here of reprimand, was that issued shortly after he was promoted? Can anybody answer that? It looks like 2018. I don't know what the promotion date is offhand for Sergeant Ramirez. Anybody know that?
I believe it was, and we can ask him, I think it was either 15 or 16.
Okay, so this is well after the initial promotion.
Promotion was by August 2015.
Okay, so this, I was getting to, was this during a probationary period of promotion or not? No, it was not. One final question. If this demotion is sustained, is Deputy Ramirez, is he eligible in the future to retest for a promotion back to sergeant, or is there policy that prohibits that in this case?
He would be eligible to retest at some point.
Okay, thank you.
I have just one other question. Are
Lawsuits regarding
against Mohave County for what has occurred?
Not to this date. Am I correct in saying that, Kim? I don't,
To my knowledge, there's not.
yeah, to my knowledge, not to this date.
All right, do we have cross-examination?
Sheriff, if Deputy Ramirez was to attempt to promote the sergeant, he'd be the one who would make that decision, is that correct?
If I'm sheriff at the time, yes.
Do you have the binder in front of you?
I do.
Oh, sorry about that. Thanks. At page 57.
Okay.
And just let me know when you're there, please.
Okay, I'm there.
And this appears to be a transcript of the interview between Lieutenant Ellsbury and then Sergeant Ramirez, correct?
Yes.
And it's on the second search and rescue issue?
Yes.
Can you go to the page 63, please?
Okay.
About halfway down, there's a large paragraph that says JE, no, comma, even. Do you see that?
Could you speak just a hair louder? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. About halfway down, there's a large paragraph that starts with JE, and then it
Okay.
says no, comma, even. So 3 lines down, 5 or 6 words in. See, I don't.
You want me to read the line?
No. Do you see it?
Yes, I do.
So it says, I don't know if we would have called search and rescue, if we could have located him that night and he would have been alive. I don't know that. You don't have any reason to dispute Lieutenant Ellsbury's statement there, do you?
No.
Okay. Can you go to tab 11, please? And then go to page 15, please.
Okay.
All right, this is the special observation period notice that we talked about, correct?
Correct.
And if you look in the first paragraph, it ran from June 16th of 2021 to December 13th of that same year, correct?
Correct.
And then right below it, it indicates that it includes 2 issues. One is the first search and rescue issue we've talked about, and 2 is the domestic violence incident we talked about, correct?
Correct.
And if you signed off on this observation period, correct? You can look at the last page, page 24.
Yes, I did.
Can you go to the second to last page, page 23, please?
Okay.
And if we go to the last full paragraph before the bullets, do you see where the last sentence says, expectations for improvement during this special observation period include the following?
Yes.
Okay, first bullet is improve your decision-making and job knowledge skills, correct?
Correct.
Second one is follow all orders from supervisors.
Yes.
Next one is follow all policies and procedures regarding your duties.
Yes.
And then you will have weekly meetings with Lieutenant Padilla regarding your performance. Please contact Lieutenant Padilla regarding dates and times. Do you personally know if those meetings with Lieutenant Padilla happened?
I do not.
If you go to the next page, please. Are you on the last page?
I am.
Okay, you indicate your performance and conduct will be closely monitored and documented during the observation period, correct?
Correct.
And if you go to the next paragraph, you state that if you have unacceptable performance or conduct during the special observation period, it may result in disciplinary action up to and including dismissal.
Yes.
So December 13th of 2021, you could have disciplined Sergeant Ramirez if he didn't satisfactorily perform his duties, correct?
Correct.
And that discipline could have included termination.
Correct.
You didn't discipline him in any way, did you?
No.
Thank you, nothing else.
Yes, thank you. Sure. Was the intent, the reason that you demoted Deputy Ramirez based on conduct that occurred during the special observation period?
No.
Was it conduct that occurred after special observation ended?
Yes.
And was the conduct that he was demoted for an exact replica of the conduct he was put on special observation for?
Almost identical.
Same policy revising.
Yes.
Now, you briefly had said it a while ago that your one regret in this is that action would have been initiated earlier. Can you clarify when you mean action initiated earlier? What are you talking about with the end result being?
Okay, so I'm saying hindsight is 20/20. I was hoping after the first incident that we would see measured improvement, the special observation period. There was no discipline during that time, and we normally find that when people are being closely watched, they're on their best behavior. That's how that works. Shocking to me that less than 14 months later, after the initial interview I had with him during the disciplinary hearing, where I lessened my intent to dismiss, that we're facing the exact same thing again. So when I say that the regret I have, I guess I can explain it simply. If I would have known what I know now, if I would have known what, you know the saying, knowing what I know now, had I demoted then Sergeant Ramirez in 2021, the likelihood of him being involved in the search and rescue debacle of 2022 would have probably been close to zero. So that tells me, in reality, we would have been able to start our investigation and activate our search and rescue immediately had another officer responded and simply followed policy. So that's what I'm referring to.
And the sooner you begin your search, is it true the likelihood of a rescue is substantially higher?
100% true.
And in this case, it was days delayed.
Days delayed.
And that delay was a result of the policy violations and inadequacies of former Sergeant Ramirez.
Correct.
And in this case, as well as the Golden Valley case, did these turn into recoveries?
Both times, yes.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Anything on the panel? You are dismissed. Thank you.
Thank you. I used to carry books wherever I go.
Any more witnesses for the county? Okay. All right. The appellant is your case.
Call Deputy Ramirez.
Please state your name for the record.
Michael Ramirez.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give in these proceedings shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth under penalty of perjury?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Can you explain to us why you got into law enforcement?
It's been kind of I've always been the good person in life, and it's something my family's always taught me, that good people have to be there to step up, and that's what law enforcement does. They're there to step up to stop other people from doing bad things.
Has your entire law enforcement been here at the county?
Yes.
When did you start?
Well, I'll back it up. I did start with Kingman Police Department for maybe less than a year, and I came over to the sheriff's office.
When did you come to the sheriff's office?
2013, I believe.
And in 2013 or 2003?
I'm sorry, 03, you're correct. Sorry.
In what capacity were you hired?
I started out in the detention office, detention officer, and then moved to patrol deputy.
And how long did you stay a patrol deputy?
Approximately 13 years, 12 years, 13 years.
At that point, you became a sergeant?
Yes.
What was that process?
To become a sergeant?
Correct.
We have to take a written test. Then you're given through an oral board. You have to answer questions. And that was pretty much at that time. They've since then changed it a little bit, but it was an oral board and a written test.
Why did you want to become a sergeant?
I enjoy teaching other officers to how to do the job and ensure that they're doing it correctly, and sometimes help them through the struggles when they're not able to figure out how to solve a case. Before I became a sergeant, I was an FTO, and that was one of the things I enjoyed. And as a sergeant, you can pretty much be an FTO to several people at one time.
I want to talk about...
I'm going to ask the witness to slow down in your speech a little. I'm having problems. I don't know if anybody else is, but understanding everything you say. Is that also? Okay. So the panel would like you to slow down.
Yes, ma'am.
Also, for those that are not in the public safety, in acronyms, just try to say what they mean, FTO, that type of stuff. Just explain what that means.
An FTO is a field training officer. When officers are first hired, they're required to go through a field training program, and they're assigned to ride directly with a field training officer. And that's what I did for numerous years.
When did you become a field training officer?
I don't recall the exact date of that. It would have been like 5 years after becoming a patrol deputy.
Are you still a field training officer?
Yes, I am.
Even after you've been demoted?
Yes, I am. I just completed field training with a deputy 4 weeks ago.
I want to talk about your performance as a sergeant as it's been alleged by the county. They've indicated that your performance was overall satisfactory, but then indicated that in the evaluations, you received some negative remarks. Did you ever do anything to address the alleged negative remarks in your evaluations?
I initially got the first negative remark on the evaluation, the very first one. I just chalked that up to being new, because I was a new sergeant, there was going to be a low rating. The second time around, I got another one. So I did make a change, and all right, I'll prove I can do the job. I won't contact my lieutenant and ask any questions at all. I'll just do the job and show I can do it. That didn't change. I still got the low marks. And so I just assumed it's just keep trying to work and it'll improve. There was no reasons behind the low marks. I was never given any instructions.
Explain the low marks. What did they say?
The low marks were on job knowledge. They were giving me a 2 on a rating scale where 3 would be average.
And that's what it said, knowledge of the job? Is that it?
Yeah, it's a category for job knowledge and decision making. I was given a 2 there was no documentation or explanation as to why.
And as to that, you decided not to talk to your lieutenant about it?
During that one period, I said, I'll prove myself and I'll just do the job and show I can do this.
Are you able to provide any documentation during the review process to show that you do have the job knowledge?
I'm able to complete the job, and every day I go and I do the job without any issues.
What I'm saying is, like, when they put you through review, are you able to provide documentation showing I've taken this training, I've done this, or I've completed this assignment?
No, there was nothing for me to show improvement in. There was no reason for lack of knowledge. They didn't say like lack of knowledge in doing vehicle searches, so I couldn't go get training on that. There was just a general statement saying low performance.
Well, did you do anything to improve your knowledge of the job?
As far as external training, no. I just did the job and showed I can do the job.
So I understand you when it said that gave you a 2 or unsatisfactory rating on knowledge of the job. You neither talked to your lieutenant nor did you do anything specific to improve your knowledge of the job. Is that what your testimony is?
Yes, I had no direction of why I was a low standard.
Just to clarify, did you ever try to talk to a supervisor when it first came up about what the alleged issues were?
Yeah, I even put it on one of my evaluations that I didn't understand the reason for the low rating, and that I did not agree with it. And I explained the same thing I had put on there, that I do the job every day, yet I've never had given any direction as, hey, you did this wrong. Well, let's talk about this. Why did you make this decision? That never came up every day. And then when my evaluation comes around, I'm given a low standard.
So he actually did document it?
Say again?
He actually did have that documentation on your evaluation.
I think you're pressing the button, so we're not.
Okay, so you did document it then on your evaluation?
I did, yes.
And you sort of touched on this, but to clarify, were you ever told you're lacking skills in this specific area?
Not in a specific area, no.
Did any supervisor or anybody from the county ever come to you and say, we want to give you training in this specific area?
No.
I'm going to jump ahead here and we'll get into this more later, but in 2021, for 6 months or 180 days, you're on a special observation period, correct?
Correct.
And part of that, to successfully come off of that, you had to be able to successfully complete your job duties, correct?
Correct.
Let's jump forward to 3 issues that have been raised, and we're going to talk about all of them, so I want to make sure I separate them when I talk to you. One is the domestic violence incident in 2021. One is the missing person in 2021, and then the third is the missing person in 2022. On the domestic violence.
Counsel, I also ask you to speak up and to speak slower.
Okay, sorry about that. On the domestic violence incident in 2021, are you familiar with Arizona Revised Statute 133601?
Yes, I am.
And specifically subsection B?
Yes.
Is your understanding of that statute that in certain circumstances you may arrest an individual and in certain circumstances you shall arrest an individual?
That's correct.
What is your understanding of subsection B?
It basically comes down to physical injury. The statute says if there's a physical injury, then you shall arrest, meaning you have to make an arrest. No physical injury, it comes down to a probable cause, and you may make an arrest.
The domestic violence issue in April of 2021, was there a physical injury that you were aware of?
No, there was not.
Is your understanding of county policy consistent with this statute?
Yes, it is.
Do you recall your interview with, I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name. Tell me again. Okay, with this gentleman, do you recall ever in that interview stating to him that opinion of yours that it was not required by statute or policy?
I don't know if I expressed it to him, but I did express it to the sheriff during our meeting, when I had a meeting with the sheriff.
So, but do you deny that on that, in that particular interview, that you told him it's just not done anymore?
What I meant by that is the probable cause part of it. Some officers will arrest on the slightest probable cause, and that's where the deputies have become more allowing more separation of the parties rather than going right to an arrest. They try to separate the parties before they just make an arrest. Without a physical injury, they'll separate.
So then you take at least one of the parties into custody to protect the person, don't you? I mean, you leave and what happens after that?
Well, it depends on the situation. And in this particular situation, one, there was no physical injury. The parties were already separated, and the deputy at that time also had looked for the suspect.
Thank you.
We're going to now talk about the 2 missing persons issues. The sheriff mentioned that hindsight's 20/20. You'd agree with that, right?
Correct.
So we're sitting here today, a year or more later than those incidents. In hindsight, should you have acted differently?
Yes.
Are you up here today stating you're the best sergeant this county's ever had?
No, I'm not.
The 2021 incident, if I understand correctly, remains that maybe that individual have been found, but it hasn't been confirmed whether it is or isn't him, is that correct?
That's correct.
Do you recall approximately how long after the missing person call they were found?
It was approximately 5 months.
So walk me through that incident. What did you do and what did you do wrong?
On that day that we had searched the property, the deputy in Grassi had interviewed the father, and he had relayed to me what the father had told him. So we had searched the property. There was a lot of places outside of the main residence where the individual could have been. So our first response is you check the property, make sure there's no one out there. You know, he could have had some kind of injury there and was just laying down by a tractor or something like that. So we searched the property. There was nothing located. I expand my search. I'm now looking at the perimeter of the property, looking for any tracks that an individual could have walked away. So I wasn't able to find any. So that's what we had did, and that was the correct process. That's what you want to do. You want to search the house first. After that, or I obviously did not do is I did not notify my search and rescue coordinators to have them come out to search the desert area outside of the residence.
Sir, do you deny that in your interview, your IA interview, that with regard to the SAR notification, that you haven't seen that form filled out by anybody in years?
The search and rescue data sheet, that form was created ages ago, long before any of us here were part of the sheriff's office. And it was not getting filled out, not just by myself or the deputy in Grassi at the time. It just wasn't getting filled out. Even the search and rescue coordinator, I'd asked him after that, how often do people actually fill this out? And he had told me that he never collects those.
What I don't understand, though, is there was a lengthy, at least 15 minutes discussion on this on the record, and you never said that to the IA interviewer. Can you explain that?
I'll admit I was a little closed down when I was speaking with him.
Thank you.
Do you have the binder in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Go to tab 11.
I have a question about that time period. What do you usually do? Like they said, like you're saying, you used to fill out that data sheet form. So what do you do now to keep it in your head and you go to write up the report? What actually happened?
Well, part of the reason why I believe that it went away is that we've gotten to where now we are computer-based. So a lot of the information is on the computer that the search and rescue coordinators use. There's some stuff on the data sheet that would assist him as far as if he smokes, any kind of health issues. But a lot of that stuff is transferred anyways verbally to the coordinator when he arrives on scene. We give him that stuff anyway, verbally.
Okay, but you were by yourself in that particular incident, right?
No,
Elderly man.
no, Deputy Ingrassi was the initial responding officer. I responded secondary as the supervisor.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But I understand in the interview, the IA interview, that you did not contact SAR.
That is correct. That is where I made my mistake.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate, you're not up here today saying you did everything right that day, correct?
Correct. I know I made mistakes.
Did you go to Exhibit 11?
And where is that at? Which tab?
Should be tab 11.
Tab 11. Okay.
We went over this with the sheriff. At 15, this is the special observation period. And then if you'd go to page 24, please.
Okay.
In the last paragraph, it indicates you were not allowed to grieve or appeal this, right?
Correct.
So you accepted this and you performed during the special observation period, correct?
Yes.
Can you go one page before to 23? And the last bullet, it indicates that you'll have weekly meetings with Lieutenant Padilla regarding your performance. You see that?
Yes.
Did you contact Lieutenant, it says please contact Lieutenant Padilla regarding dates, times. Did you do that?
I don't know if I'm the one who reached out. I was understood that he was the one to give me evaluations.
Did you ever have a weekly meeting with Lieutenant Padilla regarding this special observation period?
No, never.
One clarification, because I believe you just said that you did not contact Sergeant Padilla as you were instructed to do.
That's correct. That's correct.
You understood that Lieutenant Padilla was aware of this?
Yes, and after our meeting, my meeting with the sheriff, I thought he was going to contact me and just give me my evaluations. I thought I was going to be getting written evaluations from him.
But different question. Lieutenant Padilla was aware of the special, he was your direct supervisor.
Yes, he was my direct supervisor.
He was aware of the special observation period.
Yes, he was.
Let's go to this missing person incident in 2022. What happened there? And again, you're acknowledging in hindsight wrongdoing, correct?
That's correct.
What happened there and what should you have done wrong?
We responded again for a search of a missing person, a report of a missing person. Another deputy had contacted the reporting party, the pastor, and it was relayed to me that this individual had possible dementia. When I was asking questions about what the situation, things had come up that kind of contradict somebody with dementia. That's the reason why I said this individual, the pastor, wasn't credible information. The contradictions were that he shows up weekly to his food box, which is dementia means you forget things. So he shows up weekly for his food box. He always goes for walks on his own, but always manages to find his way home. He lives alone. He had a court date coming up. And they thought it was in Kingman, but technically it was in Bullhead City. And he remembered the court date. He had talked about the court date. He walks alone all the time from Yucca to different places. These aren't things that normally someone's got dementia would be able to do.
So
I do
these
have
were
a
your
question.
thoughts.
Have you ever met this pastor before or ever had any type of conversation with him that would give you pause to think that he was not credible?
It wasn't him himself that is not credible. It was the information that wasn't credible. That's what I was basing it on. And no, I never spoke with him since at that night and never spoke with him since or met him before at all.
Well, and in fact, you were just basing it on the dispatch report that asked you to contact him, correct?
No, my information was based off of Deputy Cardenas, who had contacted him.
And just to be clear, this was your thought process in 2022, not as we sit here today.
Correct.
We sit here today, you acknowledge wrongdoing, correct?
Correct.
You agree that you should be disciplined in some way.
Correct.
I want to talk about your retirement. I'm going to use the acronym real quick. I'll say what it means and then PSPRS, that's the Public Safety Personnel Retirement System. That's the retirement system you're in, correct?
Yes.
And it's a defined benefit pension plan?
Yes.
And you can receive a normal pension at 20 years, is that right?
Correct.
If you continue in that retirement system beyond 20 years, does your retirement go up?
Yes.
What is the deferred retirement option program? What does that mean?
Well, there's quite a bit to that. At 20 years, your pay freezes, and then you continue to work for another 5 years, and then you get a lump sum of money at the end of that 5 years for the drops.
So just to clarify, not necessarily at 20 years, when you retire, your pay freezes, correct?
Correct. When you decide to go into drops, it can be 20, 25, 30, depending, you choose when you want to go into drops. After 20, the amount or the percentages change for every year that you choose to go beyond 20.
They go up for every year that you're still there.
Correct.
And then the PSPRS looks at the number of years you worked, and they multiply it by your highest 3-year average, correct?
Yes, they take the highest 3, and that's how they determine what your retirement's going to be.
Explain the high 3. How does that work?
It's your highest 3 consecutive 36 months. It doesn't go from January 1st to December 30th. It can be from July, 3 years, 36 months to the following July, but consecutive 36 months. They figure out what you made that time period, and that's what they determine your salary, your retirement on.
You were demoted in September of 2022, is that correct?
That's correct.
And so for you personally, is your highest 3-year average the 3 years before that?
That was my high 3. That's where, just before that is where it would have stopped.
If you receive the 17% demotion, are you ever going to be able to, are you going to possibly be able to work long enough to get to where your high 3 is ever more than it was the 3 years before September 2022?
Not unless I work like for another 40 years, no.
So in August, September 2022, before the demotion, let me back up. You hit your 20 years and are eligible for normal retirement. Is that in this summer in July of 2023?
Yes.
So without the demotion, you have a lot of options on how long you can work, if you want to drop, when you want to drop, how much you're going to take, correct?
That's correct.
If you receive a 17% demotion, do you have any options without significantly detrimentally impacting your retirement?
I won't be able to increase it.
And it's a defined.
I'm going to caution you, counsel. I can't understand what he's saying.
Can you restate that, please?
I will not be able to increase that 36, that high 3 or 36 months. It is going to be what it is until I decide to retire.
But would that 36 still be when you go to retire, that 3 consecutive, is at the highest, that would still be considered, correct?
Yes, it doesn't matter when you do your highest 3. You can, for some reason, if you get your highest 3 in your first 5 years, then that's when it would be. It doesn't matter what your career is, but in this situation, now that's pretty much locked in. I'll never get back to that again.
But you were at the max, correct?
Yes.
At the sergeant level?
Yes.
And you had 3 consecutive years at the highest max, correct?
Yes.
Does your high 3 have to be in your last 60 months of employment?
No, it does not.
You were at the max for a sergeant, but you could have continued to increase.
Yes, you can always work more overtime.
I'm going to ask about how this is material to anything. In other words, are you anticipating that he would become a lieutenant? Because he was maxing out.
No, but they could have increased the pay scales, they could have increased the COLAs, and the longer. Could
have, but this is what, okay.
But objectively, the way the PSPRS works, the longer you work, the more you receive. So if you work.
And so he has the chief to thank for the fact that he is working.
No, I would disagree with that. But the longer you work under PSPRS, the more you get multiplied times your highest 3. That's why it's relevant.
Get to your point and move along, please.
Based on the 17% demotion, you really have no choice. You have to either retire or enter the drop in July of 2024, correct?
Correct.
And because it's a defined benefit pension, it's the rest of your life.
Correct. It's not going to change. I can continue to work, but retirement will never change.
So
and I think this lacks foundation. Neither of you is an expert in the system, and I'm totally lost. I don't know about the rest of the panel, but please move along.
We've gone through it a couple of times.
Maybe I can help. If he has if he's in, say, a rank of number 3, and he's at the top of that, if he wants to, he won't get any more, no matter how many years he gets. And that's where it stands. So that's where it's,
That's why I don't know why we're going on.
But it's an apples to oranges because you're talking about the salary, but it's multiplied by the number of years he's in the system.
so he's going to say that, okay, because I'm not a sergeant anymore, I'm not going to get as much as I could have.
That's right.
In pensions. Is that what you're saying?
It's not, no, not necessarily the sergeant. It's the percentage of the demotion.
Okay.
So to be clear, what prevents Deputy Ramirez from adding to his multiplier with the years of service? You're saying he has to stop at 20 and go on the drop. Why would that be? Because he can continue to work to 32 years and get percentages added to his multiplier.
That's correct. But if he goes to, I think he's at $33 an hour now, he will get, in 12 more years, he will get COLAs, and there will be different merit increases over time. He'll go up from that 33 instead of from the higher number. So he'll never get back to a better position than he is
Well,
now.
counsel,
salary.
are you also quibbling with the county's rules about what a demotion means? And in
What a
terms of
demotion
salary?
means?
Yes.
No, the reason that's relevant is there's no in between. You know, if there was the possibility that he could be demoted and given a lesser percentage, then we could discuss that. That's not an option.
So you're really not arguing that he needs to have more money in his demotion. What you're arguing is he shouldn't have been demoted.
No, I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing that under the just cause standard, under the Law Enforcement Officer's Bill of Rights, the discipline cannot be excessive, and it includes a review of everything, including his service record.
Okay.
And my argument is,
So the issue is whether or not we think 17% demotion, salary reduction is without just cause. Is that correct?
somewhat.
All right, then that's what you need to argue.
Again, multiple times you've admitted wrongdoing, correct?
Correct.
You've admitted that there should be discipline, correct?
Correct.
What do you think the appropriate discipline is, given the fact that it's a demotion with a 17% reduction in pay, or there's no demotion, and there's other discipline along with no demotion?
Not quite sure which one. I mean, I believe there should have been discipline because I did make mistakes. That's evident. There are other options that he could have taken. There's the suspensions without pays. The county affords him a maximum of a month. That would have been acceptable as well.
You believe a month-long suspension would be appropriate?
Yes.
Thank you, nothing else.
Is there any questions from the commission?
Yes, before across. I want to circle back around to the evaluations. I've gone through them a couple times now, and would you agree that your evaluations that are in this packet vary? Some are decent and good, some are not so good, correct? They're not all bad or all good, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the way I read this, and I'm focusing on your statement earlier that you said you weren't sure why you were given low marks in certain cases, and you even wrote to that effect. But I'm looking at the correlation between the low marks and the multiple instances where you've either been given a written reprimand and or an IA investigation. And it looks to me like the correlation is when you didn't have any problems with your job performance, you got good marks. When you had problems with your job performance, including an evaluation that was only a few days before the issue that you had in 2021, you received low marks in the areas where those tasks were not adhered to. I don't see why you would be confused as to why those marks were given to you based on the fact that you're just coming out of discipline or investigations. I think it's obvious that the people who evaluated you knew about these instances and therefore rated you low in those areas that you were deficient in. So can you maybe expand as to why you're not, or why you're confused as to why your marks were low in those particular cases?
The low marks were prior to the first one, which there was a written reprimand. I was getting low marks from the very onset, and it never shows improvement, and I never had any kind of documentation as to why those things were happening. What was his reasoning behind it? He never gave me any kind of documentation or even had conversations prior and leading up to those times.
Okay, to be clear, I'm looking at the letter of discipline for 2018. It was like November. And then I'm looking at an evaluation just 6 months later, which I'm guessing is right after, or the next evaluation after that happened, and you're receiving low marks in 2019 in areas like job knowledge, decision-making, obviously correlated to the 2018 letter of reprimand. Same token, your job performance in 2019, or sorry, 2021, is only a few days removed from being investigated by the lieutenant. So I kind of disagree with you there, where you're not given the reasoning. It looks obvious to me that the reasoning is because of the job performance, and unfortunately there was no notes listed there. I don't know why that happened, but to me it's fresh in the mind of the evaluator. So I'm just trying to make a sense of that. That's all.
Yes, thank you. Deputy Ramirez, I want to talk to you about the incidents that were you did during direct. And for clarification, as a law enforcement officer, you received yearly training, correct?
Yes, yes,
And to this day, you still have to adhere to that yearly training requirement, correct?
correct.
Now, back up to the DV case. There was a witness to that assault, correct?
Correct.
And there existed probable cause to arrest in that case, correct?
Yes,
You didn't respond to that incident. You were purely approving the report of a subordinate, correct?
correct.
Did you ever send that report back for further investigation or more follow-up?
No, I did not.
Your first incident in Yucca, you stated just previously that you know the first step to a search is to search the property, correct?
Correct.
Why didn't you do that in the second case?
I don't know.
When you were placed on special observation, you were never proactive in reaching out to your lieutenant for any type of progress reports, meetings, anything of that nature.
No, I was not, no.
And you, in fact, were not demoted during that time period you were on special ops, correct?
That's correct.
In fact, you were demoted for violating the same policies after you got off special ops that you violated in 2021.
Correct.
And those 21 case and the 22 case were all based on missing persons.
Yes.
And you admitted just now, numerous times, that you were wrong. You committed wrongdoing.
Correct.
And as a supervisor, you admitted to Lieutenant Ellsbury you didn't follow policy.
Yes, hindsight, yes.
And you admitted you didn't follow policy in 2021 IA as well as the 2022 IA.
Correct.
Okay. And your statement today is that you should be punished.
Correct.
So I guess what we're here for today for your purposes is a money issue.
No.
So maybe then you can clarify, because you've been on the stand this entire time stating you did wrong, you violated policy, you should receive a month suspension without pay for violating the same policies that you were counseled on in 21 which resulted in another person having to be recovered, not rescued. But your main concern is your retirement through the PSPRS, or the deputy retirement, law enforcement retirement.
That's not the main concern, no.
But when you retire, you in fact are going to retire at a sergeant pay because it's the last 10 consecutive years.
Oh, no,
So you're not going to retire at a sergeant pay?
not for the last 10 consecutive years. I'm saying no to that. For the last 36, there's a 36-month period that I would retire at.
Okay, so you will retire with a sergeant pay.
Yes,
So even as a deputy, if you retire as a deputy, you're still getting the sergeant pay through your retirement.
at the time, yes.
I don't have any further questions.
Anything on rebuttal?
Just briefly, deputies, your position is that the motion together with the percentage reduction is excessive, correct?
Yes.
And the retirement, how does that play into that excessiveness in your mind?
It hurts my future as far as my retirement.
Thank you, nothing else.
All right, I guess if there's no more questions, you're excused. Anything else, counsel? Okay, so both sides have rested. It's now time for deliberation, and I suggest that while you're thinking your thoughts, we take a break. We may not discuss the case in line to the bathroom. We will do that out here so that you can, there's no secrets here, okay? All right, good, thanks. So we'll take a brief recess, be back, in 10 minutes? 15 minutes.
Had going a little incident out there with my car.
What?
I tripped going over the curb and fell down. So I have,
You okay?
I'm okay, yeah. Oh, goodness. Yeah.
Do you want to say to me if I did that? I know, I did the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
I fell out of the chair right away, yeah.
I'm all set, thank you.
Oh, dear. All present? Okay, I'll start.
Is your microphone on?
Thank you. Okay, I think it's time for deliberation. I'll go ahead and start briefly. I may have more to add in a minute, but I think the question here is whether or not the sheriff abused his discretion in making his decision. You know, speaking of positions and rank, he outranks us all. So I think the question is whether he abused his discretion in this case. And we know that he exercised his discretion twice in this case. The first time, he did the period of observation when he could have demoted then or even terminated. And I believe even at that point, I think my assessment of that is termination at that point would not have been abuse of discretion. And then the second time, again, we had a special observation period. We had a period in which the appellant could have, but did not seek the counsel of his superior and other superiors in the department. He just went on. And he apparently watched his P's and Q's during that time. But then to violate the same thing, the same principles that were at issue in the first case, I believe, again, it was well within the discretion of the sheriff to do a special observation, demote, or terminate. And in terms of the position that Deputy Ramirez is in financially, I don't think there's any discretion there. The council, the rules of the county is that that demotion, you have to go back down to the highest point in the, can't go any further down, you could go down, but you can't. You have to go down to the highest position to which you're being demoted back to. There's no discretion there. So my point is that I think that Deputy Ramirez should be grateful that he has a job that he can complete the 20 years and get the benefit of his highest 36 months, and he's still employed. I think that it is, I'll have to tell you, I was very dismayed by his attitude during the IA, that recording that was given to us. And, you know, that he kind of tried to finesse that here in this particular situation. But what he said during those things is, hey, everybody else does it. And he's a sergeant. I don't think a sheriff should put up with that. And I agree with that. I don't dislike Deputy Ramirez. I hope if I speed and he catches me, he doesn't recognize me. But other than that, I know this is not a funny situation. I'm sorry if That was, but again, and then council wants to split hairs as to the statute on the DV, domestic violence situation, where probable cause for arrest is the standard for the county policy. Apparently, the state statute allows a little different discretion for each individual sheriff or head officer or county or city or whatever. But the fact that here the policy is if there's probable cause, you arrest. And again, I think these are all done. All these policies are here not to be picky, but to save lives. And that, to me, is the primary thing that's on trial here today. You know, this is a case of second chances where the appellant wants third and fourth chances at the expense of the public that the sheriff's office serves. And I, for one, am going to vote to uphold the action of the sheriff's office at this point. All right. You want to give yours? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say nobody wins in these situations, but maybe we can all learn from these situations. I reviewed all the material. I tried to listen very carefully today to all the testimonies. And one of the things that I did look at, you talked about just cause, you talked about performance satisfactory, and the drop program. And you didn't feel like there was just cause. And in listening to the testimony and going through all of the written material here, time and time again, you did say in your own admission that there was just cause for the actions that the sheriff took regarding the demotions. The performance reviews, satisfactory. That can go either way, because sometimes you can have supervisors that grade a little bit harder. But again, I asked you, did you ever give them documentation, or did you ever ask, how can I improve? So that kind of gave me a little bit of pause regarding that. The drop program. My understanding of that drop program, and you did answer it, the calculation is the 3 highest months. And under testimony, you said that your sergeant pay is included in that calculation. And it's your years of service. So for me, there's no way that you could be demoted and go into that position of a deputy sheriff and you're maxed out at that, and then you're asking the sheriff to go beyond that, which really does create a compression problem within your sheriff's department, because you would have supervisors that you could be making more money than the supervisor that's in that sergeant position at the very beginning part of the pay, and you were already at the maxed on that. So for those reasons, I do agree that this should be upheld, and I do think that the sheriff was very kind in some of the things that he gave you the opportunity in. And with that, you know, the woulda, shoulda, couldas. What really sticks out to me is what was going on these calls, and that you could have done. Why didn't you do some of these things? It just, very simple things, picking up that phone. I'm just really kind of troubled by some of that. So for these reasons, I uphold it. And I wish you a great success in the future.
I didn't ask the question, but were these the only two incidences where you were on, that the call you were on was to find somebody? I don't know how I would ask that.
You can't ask it now.
Can't, okay. Well, thinking as to whether you did or didn't, and giving you the best side of that you were doing it most of the time because you had the two incidences and then you were demoted for it, only had one. So for that period of time, I would give it a little grace. But I think there's just cause to keep the your grade of pay where it is, and be thankful for it, you know. I was in a union spot too, so it's helpful that you stayed there. And fortunately, there's some times where the pay rate goes up for everybody, and they come into play. But I hope that everything goes smoothly for you from here on, and just be the best deputy we got. Thank you. So I leave things as they are.
Deputy Ramirez, public safety, public service is a tough career. It doesn't go lost on me. I understand it. We get into this line of work for reasons beyond compensation. There's a lot of things that we do that will never be compensated for. And it comes down to the decision-making throughout your career needs to go through a hierarchy. The hierarchy starts with the community and citizens you served, benefit them first. The department and organization comes next, and then individual or self is last in line in your decision-making process. And we all make mistakes, all of us in our careers, whatever field we're in. But eventually those mistakes define you if you repeat them enough. And what I see here is you've had 3 major either violations or investigations in 5 years that you were, a little over 5 years, you were a sergeant. And quite frankly, not everybody is cut out to be a ranked officer in public safety. You promote through the process, you just see if it's for you, and quite frankly, your performance will tell everybody if it's for you or not. And to me, it doesn't look like being a ranked officer is in your wheelhouse. You've had a lot of time to get through some of the issues that were brought up and things that you were charged with, and it doesn't look like any of that has changed. So the value you have the organization seems to be at deputy level, and that is where I will vote to keep you, and I sustain the demotion.
All right. If I hear you all right, please put on your microphones and confirm for me that it is the opinion of this council, commission, unanimously to sustain the department's decision at this point. Is that so?
Aye.
Okay. Aye. Okay. Thank you, and we are dismissed.